The conflict that would come to be known as the Glowing Sea War had exploded. Thousands of super mutants have erupted from the Glowing Sea in a bid to kill or expel every human living in the Commonwealth. The few Minutemen forces in the area are barely able to hold the line. Meanwhile, Enclave agents within Boston work tirelessly to sabotage and bring down the Commonwealth. In this final episode of the series, we will see the resolution of the conflict and the deep and long-lasting effects that it would have on the New England coast. It is the 2nd of June. The morning finds Minuteman Riley running north carrying an important message to Colonel Hollis of the 2nd Minutemen. The telegraph lines between the Commonwealth and New Hampshire have been cut, and now it is up to Riley to carry this vital message to the army up north. The message orders Hollis to withdraw all of his regular army units and send them south to defend Boston. But first he must send all available ammunition as quickly as possible to fill in the unexpected lack of munitions in the Commonwealth. Riley reaches Nashua, New Hampshire. However, he finds that they do not have a telegraph station. He must therefore continue running north to Manchester. Here he finds the telegraph station is broken. Riley ends up running all the way to Concord. Finally, after running for an entire day, he stumbles into town in the early hours of the 4th and delivers the message to the telegraph office. Hollis is woken up and reads the message in his field headquarters just outside of Rutland, Vermont. He now faces a dilemma. He is weeks, if not days, away from completely crushing the Green Mountain Militia. The long campaign he had fought was almost over, and this would be the signature victory of his extensive career. Yet it would mean nothing if the Commonwealth of Boston fell. Reluctantly, he begins sending out orders to return the army home. Hollis orders all available ammunition to be loaded into rail cars immediately. He then begins planning to load up his most experienced units into trains heading south into the fighting. Colonel Hollis explains the situation to Elijah Allen and then hands over the command of all operations in the New Hampshire region. All he can say is, "We'll be back." Meanwhile, in the Commonwealth, the front lines have somewhat stabilized. Plans put in place by Preston Garvey have given the Commonwealth a chance to defend itself. Citizen militia units were forming up and had been streaming south to bolster the few Minutemen units on the southern border. Although the militia was badly equipped and badly led, their numbers were saving the front lines from complete collapse. The Commonwealth militia was not well regarded by the regular Minutemen officer corps. Formed as an afterthought when the Commonwealth was founded, nobody expected the militia to ever take to the field. When the Constitution was drafted, conservatives insisted that a provision be made for citizens to stand up to tyrannical governments. So the militia was born. Totally untrained, they had varying degrees of weapons as well as experience, but what they mainly lacked was discipline. Some militia members might stand and fight, while others might retreat. Officers could not predict which would happen until the fighting had started. The only asset that the militia offered was numbers. Including all of the law enforcement groups and the naval personnel, the militia could muster just over 3,000 troops. Along with the Brotherhood of Steel units, they were everything that the Commonwealth could scrape together until the rest of the army arrived. They would all be needed to hold back the flood of super mutants now assaulting the southern border. Now, with these units slowly arriving, the Minutemen had to hold on while the rest of the army came south. At the Poseidon defense line, Captain Madeline Stewart of the Minutemen Scouts watched Preston Garvey as he commanded his troops. She had been sent by Director Fahrenheit to terminate him, but now she wondered, given the circumstances, if this was a good idea, or if it had ever been one to begin with. Meanwhile, Intelligence Director Fahrenheit reviewed the events of the previous day with her staff. She emphasized how impossible it was that 2 night-skinned warriors appeared in the president's home to kill him just as an invasion was launched. She also reviewed all the attacks that happened on that night. The conclusion in the room was that it was not just super mutants conducting these attacks. Fahrenheit created a task force of intelligence agents. Their job was to find and stop any saboteurs lurking within the Commonwealth. Set aside, she wondered if some of the private deals that she had brokered on behalf of the President had anything to do with the events currently unfolding. She knew that she had to do everything possible to stop this sabotage. But more importantly, she knew that she had to hide any potential involvement that the President might have. As if the invasion was not enough, the Commonwealth had an election set for the beginning of August. President Hancock was running for his third term in office. His opponent in the election was Captain Robert Black, the original commander of the infamous 13th Minutemen. Although Black had been a disaster as a commander, he had taken advantage of the 13th's recent notoriety in the Far Harbor intervention and the New Hampshire War to catapult himself into prominence. Black campaigned on promises of cleaning up the government and restoring the Commonwealth to what it was before the Institute. In practice, however, he was backed by wealthy farm and business owners that did not want government inspectors looking at their business practices too closely. Although Hancock could not take time away from managing the defense of the Commonwealth, Black took every opportunity to criticize the government at refugee camps, town squares, and in print media. Although advisors urged Hancock to cancel the election, he felt that the people of the Commonwealth needed to know that the government was not panicking and could defend their rights to vote while it defended their lives. The election would continue. Meanwhile, in the mutant camp, Vicious prepares to assault the newly formed defense line just north of Natick Banks. He knows that taking the Poseidon power plant just north of the line will severely cripple the Commonwealth. As it stood, the invasion had gone quite well, but he was worried that the Minutemen defenses had yet to crack. Even more troubling was the citizens of the Commonwealth came out to defend their homeland, and of course, the damned Brotherhood of Steel arrived to bolster the line even further. But if the Enclave humans were to be believed, the Minutemen would be short on ammunition and would run out soon. All he had to do was continue the attacks and press the defenses everywhere. He sent runners to Strong and Torment to continue their onslaught. With a little more pressure and sacrifice, he was certain that the Commonwealth would break. Further to the south, the Enclave arrives at Virgil's lab and claims their prize. As part of their arrangement, Virgil had recreated a massive superhuman named Horrigan for them. What they would do with him, he could not imagine, but studying his DNA had given him ideas. The first captives from Murkwater settlement had arrived at Virgil's lab. He had been experimenting with an injectable form of the FEV. Instead of dipping subjects into vats of FEV, he wanted to try and inject them instead. Although this method would be much slower, it would be much more portable. If it worked, Virgil would then make a gas version of FEV in order to infect as many humans at once. But for now, he had to make these humans into mutants and replenish the ranks of the mutant army. The mutant army would soon procure more subjects for his experiments. Strong's column had crossed the Charles River Bridge under heavy fire. From there, they were able to expand their beachhead across the river by taking Egret Marina to the south and the Brotherhood base to the north. As more mutants arrived, he planned to take the entire east bank of the river and to link up with Torment's forces in the south and then Vicious in the north when he took the Charles River Dam. He could then safely proceed into downtown Boston itself. On the 7th, mutant scouts report to Vicious that the eastern parts of the Minutemen line near the river is manned by militia troops only. He prepares a feint on the western part of the line using mutant hounds and centaurs. Once the Minutemen are distracted by this, he will launch the real attack. He assembles a large war party along with the massive behemoth Swan to lead in the assault. The feint goes forward and draws the attention of the Minutemen. forcing them to shift troops to the west to cover this attack. Once Vicious is certain of the defenders' movements, he launches his attack on the east. The attack is immediately successful. The militia, seeing the monstrous swan leading a horde of mutants, breaks and runs. Mutants pour through the gap in the defenses. Garvey realizes his mistake and scrambles to cover the sudden gap in the line. He personally leads Minutemen to try and rescue the situation. He puts up his hand and tries to halt the panicked retreat. Garvey faces off against 3 militiamen that threaten him with their weapons. The militiamen then back off when a Minuteman captain with a gun steps up from behind Garvey. Garvey cannot quite recognize her, but has no time to think about it. Realizing that the Poseidon defense line was now breached, he rallies his Minutemen and begins a fighting retreat to the southern fence line of Port Hagen. His engineers blow the Forest Grove Bridge across the Charles River, denying the super mutants access to the rest of the Commonwealth. Vicious is elated. As the humans run from their defenses, his super mutants massacre several of the remaining defenders. He sends some mutants into the Poseidon power plant to wreck the machinery. The Enclave had emphasized how dependent that the Commonwealth has become on these power plants. Massive power outages hit the city and several settlements go dark. Hancock knows that without power that the Commonwealth would be crippled. Now the only power plant they had left was the Poseidon water turbines just south of Everett Estates. He reaches out to Paladin Olmsted. The Brotherhood operated a small factory in the northern Commonwealth, turning out fusion cells and plasma cartridges. They used a small nuclear reactor in the basement for power. Olmsted agreed to hook up the reactor to the Commonwealth grid to temporarily ease the power strain. Eventually, Commonwealth engineers were able to connect the Vault 75, 111, 114, and 81 reactors into the power grid to partially offset the power cuts. The disaster at Poseidon played into Black's hands. He claimed that Hancock's incompetence at appointing Garvey as commander caused this tragedy. Black even went as far as demanding that Hancock be immediately impeached for incompetence and treason. Some sympathetic newspapers even clamored for Black to be installed as president immediately. After 8 days, Torment's forces have almost completely encircled Quincy. The 11th Reserve Minutemen Company had come down from the castle to try and relieve the Quincy garrison. However, the 11th had just recently returned from New Hampshire after being mauled by the Green Mountain Militia, and was barely able to field half their normal strength. They could not keep the road to Quincy open. The old cannons at the castle still had not been replaced by 2296. They just had enough range to reach the northeast edge of Quincy. The first barrages send the mutants running back out of range. The mutants quickly learn to attack between barrages while the guns are reloading, and keep pushing to cut off Quincy. On the 9th, the mutants finally cut the main road leading north. As a precaution, the Vault 88 University door is sealed up, and all the surface connections to Quincy are cut. The overhead rail line headed north is now the only connection left to the rest of the Commonwealth. This lets Quincy defenders bring in supplies and ship out civilians and the wounded. On the morning of June 11th, 3 behemoths and several supermutants attacked the rail line connecting Quincy to the outside world. They just managed to wreck the rail before being gunned down by Minutemen snipers and grenadiers lurking overhead in the overpass. Quincy is now completely isolated from the rest of the Commonwealth. A small wave of panic hits the 5th Militia Battalion inside of Quincy. They begin talking about surrendering the fortress. Shaw quickly shuts this down by threatening to throw out anyone that advocates surrender. Quincy will fight on to the bitter end. The first supply train from New Hampshire arrived in the Commonwealth 8 days after the invasion began. However, Bedford train yard connecting New Hampshire to the Commonwealth is still a wreck from the super mutant attack. It will take weeks, possibly months, to repair the yard to proper working order. These desperate supplies must stop north of the train yard. Hancock, however, has anticipated this problem. He has every Brahmin from the Codman Farms herd confiscated and has them outfitted to carry ammunition crates south. Clarence Codman complains bitterly about the loss of his herd and sues the government. However, the courts rule that his case would have to be postponed until after this emergency had passed. Hancock also conscripts regular citizens to carry packs of ammunition on their backs. Anything and everything to resupply the troops at the front. Hancock knows that the Brotherhood of Steel in the capital wasteland must be made aware of this mutant menace. He orders the Navy to send a boat south to try and reach their allies by sea. Just south of Quincy, the boat encounters a large behemoth that is capsized. There are no survivors. Commander O'Brien of the Navy asks the President permission to send more ships, but Hancock denies the request. The situation at the front is far too critical, and they need every able-bodied individual at the front. He instead orders Commander O'Brien to issue weapons to most of the sailors and to march them south to join in the fight. What few sailors are left will be used to transport the Marines south from New Hampshire. Meanwhile, in a distant underground bunker, the Enclave ruling council reviews the progress that the mutant army had made. Although they had undeniably caused many casualties and taken territory away from the Commonwealth, some members of the Enclave ruling council felt that the results were not as good as they had hoped. Some, like Colonel Kane of the Enclave Special Forces Command, argued that they now had a much more effective option in hand, and that they should use it. The debate went on for a while before the council decided to hold off on the use of the device. However, Colonel Kane was slowly gaining support for his viewpoint. He would try to persuade the council again once the war progressed. On the 10th of June, the 2nd, 3rd, and 9th Minutemen disembarked just north of Bedford Station. The 2nd and 9th immediately marched to the south as they are urgently needed on the front lines. The 3rd is sent to Boston and will function as a reserve unit to tackle any breakthroughs in the lines. As the 2nd and 9th are marching just west of Lexington, they can hear fighting to the southwest. The 3rd column of the mutant invasion has reached the Commonwealth from the west. John Ashington has spent nearly 2 weeks marching his troops in a long flanking maneuver that has just struck FOB Ocjet, the Brotherhood base in the Western Commonwealth. At the moment, most of Ocjet's garrison was fighting in the south. The base was only defended by scribes, technicians, and a few civilians. Ashington's column had already overrun an empty ammunition reserve, and is now threatening the Sunshine Tidings settlement. If they get past Ocjet, they could be in Lexington by nightfall. Hollis rushes the 2nd and 9th to reinforce Ocjet and Sunshine Tidings. This is suddenly the most important priority. Unfortunately, they will not be able to reinforce Garvey in the south. John Ashington was somewhat surprised to see the Brotherhood flag flying so far east. Nevertheless, he sent a small force to the south to distract the base defenders, while a second force went to the north to find a weak spot in the defenses and enter the base. Just as they find the northern edge of the fence line, they are hit by the advanced squads of the 2nd Minutemen. Ashington sends orders to try and outflank this new unit of defenders to the north. His lieutenants report more Minutemen on the northern flank. He then sends one of his reserve units to try and bypass the defenses by the south. They report back that Commonwealth humans with guns are arriving in the Brotherhood fort and blocking the path. He sends forces to reach the Charles River and block the Fort Hagen defenders from the north. His forces then link up with Vicious's forces on the west side of Fort Hagen. They now have Fort Hagen almost completely surrounded. Ashington gives orders to settle in for a siege. He now realizes that he is facing someone worth fighting. With mutant forces pressing from the south and now another mutant force in the north, Garvey is squeezed into a pocket surrounding Fort Hagen. He evacuates the civilians from the Forest Grove and Fiddler's Green settlements by the dam spanning the Charles River. He cannot, however, retreat any further. The western water plant and the Charles River lock and dam were now threatened. If the mutants got hold of the water plant, they could deny clean drinking water to the Commonwealth. If they took and wrecked the dam, they could flood Boston. The Minutemen had to hold here or die trying. At the Siege of Quincy, Torment lost another wave of mutants attacking the strong walls of the fortress. Rather than getting back and exhausting the defenders' ammunition, Torment can only think of smashing down the walls and slaughtering the garrison inside. Unfortunately, this tactic is not working, and it is slowly wearing down his own forces. Captain Shaw is quite happy to let the mutants wear themselves out, but she is aware that the garrison is almost out of ammunition. A few daring souls have gone out to scavenge mutant ammunition between attacks, but this was not enough to keep them going. Soon they may be overrun. On the 12th of June, Hancock visits Parsons State Penitentiary and addresses the assembled convict population. Every one of the convicts except the most mentally deranged would be mobilized for national service. Those that volunteered would be issued weapons and armor. Those that did not volunteer would be issued nothing, but would still be sent to the front lines. Those that survived would be given their freedom outside the borders of the Commonwealth. Unsurprisingly, every single convict volunteered and were marched away by the prison guards. Meanwhile, in the Fort Hagen pocket, the 11th Training Command and part of the Naval Militia arrive to bolster the forces that Garvey has left. This allows him to mix in more disciplined personnel among the unreliable militia and to hold the lines. The defensive lines begin to firm up. Garvey uses this opportunity to travel to Oberlin Station to meet with their commanders and to coordinate their activity. But first, Garvey would be forced to deal with an internal crisis. The settlement of Covenant announced that they would not be sending their settlement guards to join the militia. They would instead shut themselves in and defend from behind their walls. Covenant was a small settlement that did not contribute much, but Garvey knew that if this action were allowed to stand unchallenged, that larger farms and settlements might follow suit. The whole Commonwealth could collapse in a panic. The situation called for a firm and immediate response. As loath as he was to deal with Captain Sullivan of the 3rd, Garvey knew that he was the man for the job. Sullivan went to Covenant with a platoon of regulars and called the leaders out to parley. When the gates were opened, the platoon rushed in and took the settlement at bayonet point. Soon after, Sullivan reads out the martial law proclamation to the assembled settlement. He then has Jacob Auden, the mayor, and Dr. Rosalind Chambers marched out behind the settlement and executed for treason. Sullivan then has the entire settlement, not just the guards, marched away at gunpoint to join the militia. Covenant is left deserted, an example to those that would break faith with the Commonwealth. Garvey conferred with Colonel Hollis, Captains Leonard and Sullivan, Paladin Olmsted, and Commander O'Brien, with President Hancock also arriving to listen in. They began to formulate a plan to begin taking back the Commonwealth. The first phase of the plan would be to stabilize the front lines. As militia battalions formed in the rest of the army returned from New Hampshire, they would be fed into the front lines to bolster the defenses. The recently arrived Minutemen scouts would go behind the lines to gather information on enemy formations and to ambush supply columns. Meanwhile, a central reserve force would be formed around the 3rd Minutemen in Lexington. They would gather Minutemen units from New Hampshire as well as militia units. When completed, this force would be used as a hammer to smash each of the different mutant armies and clear the Commonwealth one army at a time. Garvey estimated that it would take all of June and July to put this force together. In the meantime, they would hold on to what they had and keep the mutants from advancing further. President Hancock announced that he would have civilians begin construction of a new defensive line south of Boston proper, just in case the front lines were breached. Next, they had to deal with the discipline problem within the militia. They were untrained and difficult to control, meaning they would sometimes panic, especially at the worst of times. If the Commonwealth were to be saved, the Minutemen commanders would have to take extreme measures. Garvey issued General Order No. 3. No more retreats. Retreat without orders would no longer be tolerated. Neither would defeatist talk. With no time to properly train the militia, desperate times call for desperate measures. And without these measures, the Commonwealth may surely collapse. After the new order was executed, free speech and liberty advocates railed against these encroachments. But Garvey saw no alternatives during the current crisis. The last item for the meeting was the Quincy garrison. They could not force a corridor to relieve Quincy at this time, not without weakening defenses elsewhere. Quincy was also keeping a substantial portion of the mutant army occupied. Garvey asked Olmsted to use her vertebras to drop supplies to the garrison when possible. The castle's artillery pieces would help as best they could, but Quincy would otherwise have to be left to fend for itself. Elsewhere, Strong is facing stiff opposition from the 7th Minutemen, the Boston Militia, and the Brotherhood of Steel. He wishes to continue his drive into Boston proper, but he cannot find the forward edge of Torment's forces anywhere to the south. If he can't link up with Torment, then his right flank would be exposed to a counterattack, and he cannot continue his drive. He sends a messenger to Torment to extend his forces to meet north of Gunner Plaza. At the siege of Quincy, Torment receives a request from Strong to move part of his army north and to support his drive into Boston. Torment reads the note and disagrees. After weeks of resisting his best efforts, Torment has now become obsessed with taking Quincy. He believes that taking Quincy is the key to winning this war. He ignores the request and throws it away, abandoning his brother to his fate. Commonwealth intelligence agents have been contacting informants in the Commonwealth criminal underground looking for signs of any potential saboteurs. They received word that Triggerman mobsters were spending freshly made caps at local bars. They picked up Skinny Malone and interrogated him. He admitted that he had been paid with freshly made caps, but he claimed that he got them from Borowski, another member of the Commonwealth criminal class, and a close personal friend of the president. In early July, Vicious launches another attack along the riverside to try and take the Charles River Dam. If they can take the dam, then Garvey would be completely cut off. Swan and 3 other behemoths lead a storming party of mutants. Garvey, however, is prepared this time. During the last few nights, he has Minutemen sneak out into no man's land to bury landmines along the river. He also stations extra missile teams in that part of the line. As soon as Swan triggers a cluster of mines, the missile teams pop up and begin bombarding the giant. Grenadiers start throwing grenades at the fallen Titan. The attack ends as quickly as it begins, with the other behemoths dragging away a gravely wounded Swan. Deep behind the front lines, Minutemen scout squads harass and ambush mutant supply convoys. Although they must take massive amounts of Radex pills and Radaway, their efforts are forcing Vicious to send mutants back from the front lines to guard the supply convoys. Without a steady stream of food and ammunition, the drive into the Commonwealth begins to slow. John Ashington launches a surprise raid past Sunshine Tidings, but must turn back when his lead elements run out of ammunition. Similarly, Strong cannot force a break through the Roxbury defenses. Being so far from the main mutant column, it takes a long time for few supplies to reach him, and all he can do is hold on to the positions that he already has. The Enclave High Council meets again. The latest update on the war shows that the mutant assault had lost momentum, and now that Brotherhood was involved and the Commonwealth was getting up for total war, there was a high probability that the mutant army would lose. Colonel Kane is finally able to convince the Council to approve his operation. The nuclear device would be used. He has the device transported by vertibird to his agents northwest of the Commonwealth. He radios them to proceed with the plan as soon as possible. With one overwhelming blow, the Enclave would destroy the Commonwealth, badly cripple the Brotherhood of Steel, as well as rid themselves of the disgusting super-mutants. After determining that Murawski participated in this series of sabotage attempts, Director Fahrenheit sent intelligence officers to secretly raid his office and take him prisoner. Under interrogation, Murawski admitted that he was in contact with foreign agents, and that he had helped them acquire information about the Commonwealth and its defenses. He also revealed the names of several other rich and influential members of the Commonwealth that were potentially involved. This evidence is presented to the local Circle of Steel office. Circle of Steel operatives immediately took an interest in the case and began collaborating with the Commonwealth Intelligence Agency. Murawski was told to arrange a meeting with one of the foreign agents. Preston Garvey meets with Paladin Olmsted. They agree that the Brotherhood in the Capital Wasteland must be made aware of this invasion. The only place that had a large radio tower and broadcast equipment to reach the capital was Forward Operating Base Needham, which was currently under mutant control. Garvey proposes a solution. They would send a squad of the newly arrived 2nd Minutemen Scouts on a raid to seize the tower and broadcast a signal. Olmsted agrees, and will provide their best field scribes to repair the tower and transmit to the Capital Wasteland. Extraction, however, would be a problem, as the super-mutants would now be on alert. Olmsted again comes up with a solution. The BPS Vigilant had been on patrol at the time that FOB Needham was sacked, and was available for the mission. The patrol boat could dash in by the Charles River and extract them once the mission was done. The raid was set for the end of July. Lancer Sergeant Vega flies a vertibird at low level as she approaches Quincy by sea. The Minutemen arrange a barrage from the castle to keep the mutants' heads down as she sweeps in and lands on the overpass directly above the besieged settlement. Her crew chief pushes out several crates of ammo and food before she takes off again. Despite the barrage, some mutants still shoot at her. This method of resupplying Quincy works, but it cannot keep the fortress city totally supplied. On July 30th, a squad of Minutemen Scouts set out from the front lines towards Forward Operating Base Needham. The 5th Minutemen begin shooting towards the southern end of the line to distract the mutants. Lieutenant Alan Rubens, commander of the 2nd Scouts, decides to lead this mission personally. Along with the Scouts are 2 Brotherhood field scribes that would have to do emergency repairs on the tower and transmit a signal to the Capital Wasteland. A scout uses a bow to silently eliminate a pair of mutants on guard duty, allowing the raiders to sneak into the base. As the squad approaches the broadcast tower, a mutant comes around the corner of the burnt-out building and alerts the base. The squad begins fighting their way to the tower. At the tower, the scribes hurriedly begin to attach a fusion core power source and a portable transmitter to the tower. A mutant slays one of the scribes. Rubens fires off a flare to call the Vigilant back to the base. The last scribe finishes connecting the transmitter to the tower and broadcasts a compressed signal detailing the situation. The message repeats a few times before Rubens pulls the scribe away from the docks. The Vigilant arrives, firing at the mutant defenders. The survivors of the squad load onto the Vigilant and head back north. They have no way to tell if the Capital Wasteland received the message or not. At the end of July, the Minutemen Reserve Force is finally completed. Captain Sullivan has amassed his own 3rd Minutemen, the 6th and 8th Minutemen, the Power Armor Company, and the 2nd Pioneers, along with the Commonwealth Marines, half of the 1st Militia Battalion, and the 6th Field Artillery. This new unit is designated as the 1st Regimental Combat Team. This powerful formation will be used to reduce each of the mutant fronts attacking the Commonwealth. The first target will be the Horde attacking the Western Commonwealth near Forward Operating Base Arcjet. Along with the 2nd, 9th, and 13th Minutemen, they would then push the mutants back to relieve the forces at Fort Hagen. Once Fort Hagen was relieved, the 7th and 5th Minutemen would push against Strong's position, while the 1st RCT attacked from the north and drive them back over the river. Along with Fort Hagen, Arcjet, and Roxbury forces, they would be able to launch an attack on the main mutant army. The Quincy and Jamaica fronts would have to hold for now. For some unknown reason, the mutants at Quincy were not interested in moving north, and the siege there was holding them pinned down for the moment. On August 1st at 5 in the morning, the guns of the 6th Field Artillery begin pounding the mutant lines south of Arcjet. The Marine Company passes through the 9th Minutemen trenches and leads the assault on the mutant lines. The Marines start making progress, pushing back the mutants. John Ashington feeds more troops into the developing battle. Colonel Hollis adds in the 13th Minutemen, which causes the mutants to add even more troops. What Ashington does not see, however, is that on his left flank far to the north, the Power Armor Company is coming out of the western hills to crash into the side of his battle lines. Backed by the 3rd and 8th Companies, the Power Armor Infantry begins crushing the mutant front line. Ashington sees that his right flank is overextended and pulls them back before they get crushed from behind. He begins a fighting retreat to the southwest to merge his troops with Vicious. On August 3rd, as battles raged in the west, the election polls in the Commonwealth and on Far Harbor opened. The Conservative Party protested and took the matter to court. They claimed that the vote was incomplete if the Quincy defenders could not vote. The Supreme Court, however, ruled that the government had demonstrated that good faith efforts had been made, but it had not proved practical to have Quincy defenders vote. In the end, the vote was not as close as the Conservatives had hoped. Hancock was re-elected at 19,311 votes to 14,978, or 56% of the total vote. This was the narrowest margin of victory in his political career, but it was enough to re-elect Hancock for a 3rd term. Hancock was particularly gratified that many of the soldiers now in battle had voted for him before they left to fight. By the 7th of August, advance units from the 13th Minutemen under heavy fire linked up with the 14th Minutemen from Fort Hagen. The siege of Fort Hagen is now effectively over. Torment launches another wave assault on the southern walls of Quincy. The return fire from the defenders is not as fierce as usual. Torment's last behemoth gets to the walls and smashes it down.
You die now!
The mutants are finally inside the walls. The Atomcats rush to the breach and hold off the mutants while the other defenders flee. Shaw has her troops withdraw to a second set of walls, but she knows it is only a matter of time until they break the last of the defenses. On the 9th of August, a trading caravan enters the Commonwealth from the northwest. They pay the entrance toll at the border and head towards Boston proper to sell goods from out west. What the border inspectors do not know is that this caravan is carrying a large nuclear warhead, set to explode somewhere inside the city. By the 10th of August, the Commonwealth will be ready for the next phase of the campaign. The 7th and 5th Minutemen make a concerted push against Strong's forces. The 6th Field Artillery begins shelling the mutant positions. Meanwhile, the 9th and 13th Minutemen, along with the 6th Militia, close in from the north, trying to cut off Strong's forces. Strong loses control of his forces, as his super mutants prefer to stand and fight rather than retreat. In the very end, very few of his mutants escape as the Commonwealth forces surround and annihilate them. An Enclave agent nicknamed Shadows arrives in Goodneighbor late at night to meet with Murawski. He plans to scold Murawski about calling a meeting during the war, but instead finds himself face to face with Commonwealth intelligence agents. Shadows is taken to a clandestine safe house. While being interrogated by the Circle of Steel, he admits that his colleagues intended to use a nuclear device somewhere in Boston. Shadows is not certain where. Fahrenheit contacts the Robotics Collective. She has the collective send out iBots equipped with radiation detectors all over Boston to try and locate the device. By the 18th of August, the Commonwealth positions in the West consolidate. Preston Garvey gathers as many forces as possible to prepare for the climactic battle of the war. The troops from the reserves, the Okjuk Front, the Fort Hagen Pocket, and the Roxbury Front. The Reconstruction Corps had been working night and day to clear Bedford Train Yard and to repair the Charles River Train Bridge, as well as the Forest Grove Bridge. Supplies had been accumulating at Oberlin Station for weeks. Now the supplies were being moved across the Charles River to Fort Hagen. On the opposite side of the field, Vicious and John Ashington meet to discuss the situation. Strong is excluded from this discussion, as Vicious considers Strong to be inept and no longer dependable. Ashington's opinion is that the campaign had lost its momentum, and that the smart thing to do would be to pull the troops back into the glowing sea, where their immunity to radiation would give them an advantage. Vicious, however, disagrees. This was the battle that he had wanted all along. One last great battle to win or die trying. Both Vicious and Ashington did agree that they needed to strike first and not allow the humans to complete their preparations. They would gather the remaining behemoths, including the injured Swan, and drive them into the humans' right flank. All the supermutant forces, not on the front lines, would pour in behind them. Ashington was skeptical about the plan, but would dutifully carry it out as soon as they had their forces in place. What neither of them knew was that the Minutemen were almost ready for the coming battle, and had essentially figured out their plans. Vertibird overflights and Minutemen scouts working behind the lines reported the mutant positions to the High Command. The field commanders gathered and discussed the reports and pieced together the mutants' intentions. Garvey, Hollis, Sullivan, and Olmsted meet on the 20th. Their plan for the upcoming battle was to gather all the Brotherhoods and Commonwealth power armor into a giant armored fist, with Olmsted at the front. Hollis volunteered the 2nd and 9th Minutemen, as well as the 6th Militia, to function as an anvil and receive the mutants' onslaught. The 6th Field Artillery would saturate the point of attack, and once the mutants committed, Olmsted would come in from the west and bulldoze the supermutant army. The 1st, 3rd, and Marine companies would follow behind the power armor, while the 7th, 13th, and 14th Minutemen would then launch attacks from the left flank to try and envelop the mutants. Just like Vicious, Garvey planned to make this the climactic battle of the war. Captain Madeline Stewart had left the battlefield and arrives in the Commonwealth Intelligence Headquarters in Lexington. She finds Assistant Director Turner and tells him a story about Director Fahrenheit. An iBot patrolling a sewer line near Diamond City picks up signs of radiation, far stronger than the typical radiation sources. It immediately surfaces to report these findings. Early on the 21st, the behemoths begin their march. A Minuteman scout hiding in the rocks sends a signal back to the Minutemen to warn them that the mutants were on the move. As Swan and the behemoths approach the front lines, a Minuteman artillery spotter uses a laser to accurately gauge the enemy positions for the artillery. Swan disappears under a hail of artillery fire, and never rises again. Vicious commits the rest of the mutant force into the attack. He leads the charge as the mutants engage the right flank of the Minutemen line in close-quarters battle. Colonel Hollis leads his troops from the front. He is last seen alive sometime around 10 in the morning. At the rear of the mutant column, John Ashington notices that the Brotherhood is nowhere to be seen and becomes deathly concerned. By 11 in the morning, the Minutemen line is beginning to buckle, when out of the west come the power armor companies in a blaze of Gatling lasers and missile launchers. Vertibirds fly in from the north and begin strafing the battlefield with minigun fire. John Ashington begins to commit his forces when he sees Minutemen troops towards his right, and realizes that Vicious is about to be surrounded. He decides to withdraw and starts pulling back whatever mutant will listen to him. It is unclear whether Vicious saw this second flanking maneuver. Obsessed with victory, he continues fighting. His forces are surrounded and forced into a pocket. No quarter given or offered. Sometime in the late afternoon, Vicious is killed, and the bulk of the super mutant army dies around him. At the same time, underneath Boston, a team of Commonwealth agents and Circle of Steel operatives enters the Fenn Street sewers. They surprise Enclave spies on their way back from activating a countdown timer on the nuclear device. A confused battle erupts underground as both sides engage in close quarters. One of the agents shoots an Enclave spy as he tries to manually set off the device. A Circle of Steel specialist is able to defuse the weapon and extract the trigger mechanism. Back at Quincy, the second line of the defensive walls are finally breached. Torment personally leads the charge into inner Quincy. Shaw moves the last of her defenders into the old church, determined to make her last stand there. As the Minutemen retreat, a squad is trapped in one of the buildings. Shaw leads a rescue team to help them, but is cut down by mutant fire. Her troops drag her into the church and close the doors. Torment celebrates by having the Commonwealth flag torn down and having a mutant banner hoisted over Quincy. As far as he is concerned, he has won this war. By late afternoon, the mutants begin to batter down the door to the church to finish off the last of the Quincy defenders, when they hear the ominous roar of engines overhead. Fighting stops as the super mutants stare up, dumbfounded. The Pridwin had arrived over Quincy along with a fleet of vertibirds. The Brotherhood of Steel had finally come back from the capital wasteland. Ironclad knights and paladins rain from the sky. The Brotherhood is relentless and merciless as they begin massacring the mutants. The Minutemen from the Jamaica line join in the slaughter and finish off the last of Torment's mutants. A few days later, Preston Garvey and President Hancock greet High Elder Maxon at the airport. Garvey thanks Maxon for his Brotherhood's aid in the war. Although Hancock has never liked Maxon, he expresses his gratitude for their assistance. Paladin Olmsted is promoted to Star Paladin for handling of the crisis. Together they plan the campaign to wipe out those mutants that had escaped into the glowing sea. The Commonwealth takes time to consider the costs of war, and to reflect on what has led to the conflict in the first place. The Commonwealth Reconstruction Corps begins the lengthy process of clearing up the battlefields of the Southern and Western Commonwealth. Graves are dug for the thousands that died fighting, and for the settlers that were caught up in the first days of the invasion. Natick banks had been completely razed to the ground. The Corps begins its year-long process of rebuilding it for a second time. The Poseidon Reservoir power plant took months to rebuild, but in time it would come back online and provide much-needed energy. The Poseidon Southern power plant would take years to be rebuilt. The settlement of Murkwater and all the farms in the area were completely and totally devoid of life. No one knew where their settlers went, and they were never seen again. The few settlers that would live in the area demanded that the government build high walls and extensive defenses before they would even arrive. Barely 8 members of the 4th Minutemen left Quincy alive. None of the 10th Minutemen survived. Preston Garvey decides to fold the survivors into the 3rd Minutemen and to retire the colors of the 4th and 10th for some future date. The city of Quincy is renamed Fort Shaw in memory of the late commander of the 4th. Captain Shaw is posthumously promoted to colonel and buried in Fort Shaw. Colonel Timothy Hollis is buried with full military honors at the castle. He is the last member of the Hollis family to serve in the Minutemen. With his death, the long association of the Hollis family with the Minutemen comes to an end. The Militia Liaison Command Office was established with Major McClellan as its new commander. New laws are passed that require the militia to train at least 4 times per year. Discipline is emphasized more than anything else. At a meeting of all senior leadership of the Minutemen, the President, and the heads of the largest political parties, a vote is taken. By unanimous consent, Preston Garvey is granted the rank of General of the Minutemen. Captain Sullivan of the 3rd is promoted to Colonel. Minutemen scouts had operated for months in the glowing sea, and even with taking large doses of Radex started developing chronic joint pain and dizziness. A lawsuit determined that Radex pill manufacturers in the Commonwealth had used cheap substitutes for some of the chemicals. It would take years of litigation for the cases to be resolved. The Commonwealth government sends Governor Chamberlain of Far Harbor to meet with the Children of Atom colony on the island. In return for giving the Children of Atom exclusive custody of the nucleus ruins, the Children of Atom agreed to form a new unit that would be stationed in the glowing sea to patrol the southern border. The resistance to radiation would allow them to operate in the area. Alongside Ghoul Minutemen, they would keep the Commonwealth safe from threats coming out of the glowing sea. The 8th Militia Battalion, made up of convicts, is officially disbanded on October 15th. Of the 318 inmates in the unit, 233 had died in combat. Of the surviving 85 felons, 37 are disarmed and taken to the edge of the Commonwealth, where they are told to never return. The rest ask to remain and to join the 13th Minutemen. Minuteman Riley finally returns to Fort Hagen on the 12th of September. Having been forgotten in the rush back to the Commonwealth, Riley was drafted to serve in New Hampshire for the last few months. He finally gets permission to return home, but cannot pay for a train ticket and must walk the rest of the way. Although commended for carrying messages for the Commonwealth, he is also reprimanded for his unauthorized absence. He is sentenced to peel potatoes for 30 days. Although badly battered, the Minutemen have survived, and over time their numbers would grow to make them into an even more formidable military. Circle of Steel operatives confirm that the spies that they fought and the nuclear device that they disarmed were of Enclave origin. They now know that the Enclave is still around and begin to actively hunt for them. They cooperate with the Commonwealth Intelligence Agency and pool their resources to try and find this new menace. The Enclave High Council puts the blame for the complete failure of the war on Colonel Kane. He is stripped of rank and imprisoned, and is later executed. With this fiasco in mind, the ruling council decides that they must hide their location as best they can. For now they had too many enemies looking for them. In time, they would re-emerge and be stronger than ever. John Ashington leads the largest remnant of the super-mutant army. They lead their pursuers south and west for 2 weeks. They finally lose the Brotherhood vertibirds somewhere near Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Although Ashington is a capable commander, he does not have the charisma that Vicious had. It is here that the army splinters into various bands and groups, and they begin marching in their own direction into the wasteland. The dream of a super-mutant nation is now dead. Ashington and Virgil lead a band that will go west towards California. They now have the injectable FEV to convert humans, and Virgil plans to continue his research into super-mutant reproduction. An injured Strong leads a small band of super-mutants west. As the Allies chase down the bulk of the super-mutant army into the glowing sea, Strong leads his survivors into western Massachusetts. He continues as chieftain of his band of super-mutants for several years, but is finally killed in 2305 while raiding a farm looking for food to steal. On September 15th, martial law was repealed in the Commonwealth, and civil liberties were restored. The hated General Order 3 was also revoked. Immediately several lawsuits were filed against the Commonwealth, cases which would take months or even years to resolve. Clarence Codman's legal case is finally heard in court. The High Court rules that under martial law the government had every right to take the herd. Codman is left bankrupt. Public opinion, however, sways the government, and they finally reach a settlement with Codman for a quarter the value of the herd. The survivors of Covenant finally return home. They find that the Commonwealth has stripped away their defensive walls and gun turrets to be used as defenses elsewhere. The 3rd Medical Detachment had used their homes for convalescing wounded soldiers from the battlefield, and most of their personal items were long gone. Although the settlers sued the Commonwealth for damages, the courts found, as they were in open rebellion at the time, the seizure was legal. Johnny D and Roxy are the only survivors of the Atom Cats. They return to their garage to continue fixing power armors. Kids from the nearby Neponset settlement start coming by to learn how to repair power armor, and to hear stories about the old Atom Cats. As things got back to normal, investigative reporters began piecing together a disturbing story of government corruption and the influence of foreign agents within the government. In addition to all the bribery and gun-running cases that had been previously reported during the Great Northern War, stories were now being uncovered detailing influence peddling, corruption, and outright treason on the part of various Commonwealth officials. Spurred on by these reports, Commonwealth marshals uncover evidence of massive corruption and bribery surrounding not just the Lexam Corporation, but several other large companies in the Commonwealth. Well-known figures such as Morawski and Malcolm Latimer are arrested for bribing Commonwealth officials and cooperating with foreign agents. The president of the Lexam Corporation is convicted for providing material aid to enemies of the Commonwealth. Commonwealth marshals are quickly uncovering a conspiracy that may lead higher up. But before the investigations went too far, 2 events occurred. First, Director Fahrenheit publicly announced that she had unknowingly accepted bribes from brokers representing insurgents in New Hampshire and from agents representing the super-mutants. She asserts that President Hancock had no knowledge of these events. She turns herself in and was sentenced to 30 years for her crimes. With this confession, all investigations into the president abruptly come to a halt. Secondly, President Hancock has a closed-door meeting with the Speaker of Congress, Deputy Director Turner of the Commonwealth Intelligence Agency, and the head of the Marshal's office. After that meeting, he announces that due to health reasons, that he would resign the office of presidency on October 1st and turn over the Commonwealth to the Speaker of Congress until a new president could be elected. He would not be specific about his health problems, although some had opinions on the matter. As his last act in office, he issued a full presidential pardon for Director Fahrenheit. The two moved away to an oceanside estate in Far Harbor. The damage to the Commonwealth has been extensive, not just in the lives and property, but in the Commonwealth's urge to expand at all costs. The results of the Glowing Sea War and the ongoing conflict in New Hampshire fuel a popular sentiment to slow down expansion and to focus on perfecting the Commonwealth. Congress passes a series of laws to make the government more accountable for its actions and to seriously restrict the access and influence that certain rich individuals and companies enjoyed. The agenda for the next decade would focus on improving the lives of the citizens rather than unchecked expansion and economic growth, to allow the wealth of the land to be commonly shared. The Commonwealth has survived its infancy. It is an imperfect land, but a land where hope has returned. A place in the East where civilization can once again flourish.